by attending live, you are supporting Social Teas Rescue, which I may have mentioned before. They are a New York City-based rescue, and they do amazing work. They bring up to the city dogs from mainly from the South, I believe, from high kill shelters. So you're supporting them by attending, but also do check them out. They do some really cool work. I was actually approved to adopt from them, but I ended up foster failing with my dog. But I have a sweet spot for them in my heart. So we just did intros, so we don't need to do that anymore. Thanks to everyone who shared. Admin details. I think everyone knows this. It's about 45 minutes long. We may go over by a few minutes, so bear with us. We are recording, and the recording will be made available early next week. I'm targeting Monday. And you can take notes or screenshots if you like in the meantime, but we will try to share any resources that your presenter talks about. I'll get links to any studies or other things that are referenced. And then please stay on mute unless, we're in the Q&A portion, because as I mentioned, it is being recorded, and we also just want to make sure your presenter has a good experience. You can message me or Tatiana in the chat if you need anything, or if you're running into a tech issue at any point. So as I said, I think half the people here have already been here the last few days, but I'll do a quick intro. I'm Sonali. I'm the founder of Petminded. My background is I'm a biomedical engineer, and then I also did public health research work. And most importantly, for this context, I have a dog called Ella, who we adopted about 2.5 years ago. Ella came to us with a bunch of behavioral issues and also health issues. So that kind of just set me off on this path of trying to find her the best resources possible. And that has really inspired a lot of the programming and the mission for Petminded. So you guys have been here most of the week and you've signed up for this. So you know that we are all about science. We want to make dog science more accessible and actionable to dog parents. And we think that having access to science is not just beneficial to our pets, but it also just in general improves animal welfare. And the more dog parents like us know about science, the more we can support it. So a lot of different scientific fields have been around, for centuries, but specifically studies focused on dogs for the good of dogs, studies in dog cognition and behavior, and I guess even gut health. These are new studies, and the more we can access them and the more we can support that research, that research is going to go faster. It's going to get more funding and more eyeballs on it. So that's really a key part of our mission, to be able to support scientists in the work that they do. We do have a really cool program coming up next week. It kicks off officially on Monday. It's called What Your Dog Wants You to Know. And the goal of this program is to share with all of you some basic concepts in dog cognition. So this entire week has a common thread of dog cognition, because again, cognition is dog cognition in particular is a pretty new field. It's how our dogs perceive and think about the world. So we want to make it more accessible for you guys to understand how your dog is thinking and feeling and how they're interacting with you. There is actually some really great research that dogs, they watch us all day. They live very closely with us, so they know us really well. And our goal is that, at the end of this program, you have some of the tools to return the favor and to be able to support them. So you can also look at this as, a tool to help you with training or preventing decline as they age. But I personally view it, having this information, as having helped me to have a better relationship with Ella and just feeling more confident and being able to advocate for her as she goes through her life. If you ask Lasuna, who is our resident dog scientist, and I think she is here on the call today, she's been hiding the last few days. She calls it cognitive enrichment for both you and your dog, because she designs all the games that you play with your dog, and they're intended to just be sort of intellectually stimulating for both the parent and the pup. Lasuna says hi in the chat. Hi, Lasuna. We'll spotlight you at the end so you can say hi properly. And with that, I'm just briefly going to go over our community guidelines. Everyone's been really great this week, so I don't have to read these off. Just be the person your dog thinks you are. Bring your curiosity and be open-minded. The biggest no-no is hate speech and self-promotion. I'm very protective of this community because I want this to be a learning space where you guys can feel comfortable. So please help us maintain that. And with that, I want to introduce to you our presenter for today, Dr. Holly Gans. So Holly is a microbial ecologist and the founder of Animal Biome. I love bringing someone who is the founder of a company, but also a scientist, because I think that's a really interesting journey. Bringing scientific products to market is a really, really challenging endeavor because, it's not like building apps. It can take up to a decade in many cases, and sometimes more. So it's just really impressive. And she's an impressive person to begin with. She has her PhD, obviously, in microbial ecology. She's done research at UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, at the Genome Center. And, her bio, as I was reading it, I was like, it's really interesting to think that someone who has all these different experiences and expertise, really thinking about, the gut microbiome. You may have heard yesterday, Dr. Chavez said it's a relatively new field. And so to bring it into the mainstream is actually really hard to do. So I'm personally really excited to hear what she has to say and to share with us. So Holly, welcome. Thank you so much for participating in Dog Science Week. And we're really excited to have you here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. Should I go ahead and share my slides?
Yes, please. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is that okay if I stop yours?
Yes, please. Okay. I can stop it here.
Okay, and then I play it. So you guys see my slides? Okay, awesome. So microbiome science is kind of a really massive field. So I'm just going to cover just a little bit. And if you have any questions, I don't know, Sonali, you said that it was better to hold them, but I don't mind interruptions. I'd rather people, it's up to you. You're the moderator, but just let me know and stop me if I lose anybody, because the whole point is really to have a conversation. So as Sonali said, I'm a microbial ecologist. That's somebody who studies how different organisms like microbes or dogs or plants, how those things interact with each other. That's what sort of community ecology is. And then in this case, I'm thinking about how microbes, bacteria, fungi, other tiny microscopic organisms interact with each other, and then with animals. I just always really loved animals. So even though I discovered I love microbiology, I needed to have animals be a part of it. Prior to starting a company, which is a journey I'm happy to talk about, it's been really interesting and exciting for me to do that. I was a researcher for many years at UC Davis and UC Berkeley and some other places, and I worked a lot on wildlife actually, and looking at actually dogs and cats and some of their wild cousins like hyenas, and trying to understand how they're using microbes that live kind of in their butts to communicate. So animals live in a world of scent, and but they don't actually make many of the scents that they're detecting. Microbes actually produce a lot of them, and so you may have run into impacted anal sacs or anal glands. If you've been unfortunate enough to run into that, it can be actually shocking to discover that your dog has an anal sac. Not everybody realizes that, but there are these little openings near the butt, but they're actually super interesting because they are little houses where bacteria live and ferment little signals so the reason dogs sniff butts is actually important. They're able to tell individuals from those smells. They're able to tell reproductive status. They can tell probably health. I think it's probably no surprise to all of us, like they can detect cancer, they can detect COVID infections. There's just there's a whole wealth of information in this world of smell that we don't really participate in as much. Anyway, so I was really interested in the role that bacteria might play in that. And I was looking at it in wild animals, but I decided I wanted to see what was going on with pet cats. And so we launched a citizen science project where we offered that people could send in their cat poop to us and we would sequence it. And at this point, we were like, we don't really know what's normal for cats in the microbiome, but we wanted to sort of build a database that we're going to make public and share with everybody so that we can start to do some science for cats around the microbiome. And I did this with Jonathan Eisen, who's a really wonderful researcher, professor at UC Davis. And we launched on Kickstarter, which was like a whole new world for me. I'm a total science person and had no experience with marketing or anything outside of this whole new world that had arisen out there, which has turned out to be really exciting. We actually did really well. I was pretty excited to be picked up by I Fucking Love Science. That was like a dream for me. So that was really cool. And then we followed it a few years later with Doggy Biome, and because we did cats first because Jonathan's really a passionate cat lover, but I love cats too. But I have 3 dogs and I'm really into dogs, and my husband's allergic to cats. So of course, dogs were always coming. And once I adopted my first dog as a graduate student, Yuki, she sort of changed my whole life. And I don't know if some of you have experienced that too. It's like your first child. So we did a Kickstarter for that. And these 2 citizen science projects were really foundational for my creating a company. It helped us to get samples from healthy cats and dogs to try and understand what's normal in the microbiome. I guess I should also say, like, do you guys know what the microbiome is? It's a community of bacteria and also fungi, some other like viruses and small things that live in and on us and on our pets. And they play really important roles in health. And we really didn't understand very much about it until about a decade ago, because we didn't have the genetic tools to characterize most of these organisms. And so starting in the last, 6-7 years, there's been a real effort to try and build databases, both with humans and also with companion animals, to basically build the sequence data so that we can know what's normal for people and their pets. And I found from interacting with people that like it wasn't a problem asking people to send in a little bit of poop in the mail to us for sequencing. It was not an issue. Like sometimes you meet people and they're like, usually I feel like it's like older men who didn't take care of their children's diapers or whatever, and they're like, that's gross. But like, it's never been a problem with pet parents for us. They're used to it. In fact, they sent us all these photos of like what's going on. They wanted to talk about it. People who had problems with like diarrhea or constipation, or like cats that have chronic hairballs. Like these were problems I had never thought about, thinking about like cheetahs and things like that. So some of the fun questions that we tried to look at to be engaging, and also because there's some interest in this, like, so behavior, right, is something that people are super interested in. I would say it is early days for understanding that. But there have been some studies suggesting that like anxiety or aggression might be influenced by the microbiome, and some really nice mouse model work showing that. Can share some references on that for those who are interested. So one thing we thought about with kitty biome was, does grumpy cats microbiome differ from happy cats? By engaging with a few celebrity pets, was able to get people kind of more excited about these studies. I think I didn't even know about celebrity pets when I started all this. I was really isolated. But Grumpy Cat said no to me, which, what would you expect Grumpy Cat to say? No. But then turns out there's Little Bub, another celebrity cat that you may not have heard of, not quite as famous as Grumpy Cat, but and she passed away last year. But her pet parents were very science friendly, and we're like, if it's going to help research to improve the health of cats, and then or just basic research on cats, we're happy to help. So I got to go meet Lil Bub and get a poop sample. They were like, here's the litter box, go get it. But that's fine. I didn't mind doing that. And we asked people for both of the studies a lot of questions about whether or not their pets suffered from anxiety or stress or depression. In the case of cats, it seems like it was much more prevalent. I mean, these are definitely issues for dogs as well. We found that 22% of the people in that study reported that their cats had signs of anxiety, stress, or depression. But when we looked at the microbiome, and don't really worry about this, but the main point of this plot is to show that the red and blue dots are all over each other. We didn't find for this study that there was a significant difference associated with anxiety, stress, or depression versus those that said that they didn't have it. Of course, we don't know, like maybe it's normal for most cats to be kind of high strung. So, but one thing we did do, we did some deeper sequencing of Lil Bub's sample, and we looked, so we used a sort of metagenomics approach that's kind of like very fancy, and we can't afford to do it. I haven't even done it for anybody else but Lil Bub. It's very deep sequencing, but it allowed us to actually get complete genomes for 22 new organisms of bacteria that are new to science. And I'm sure that if we did this for dogs, which I'm planning to do, we would also find that basically the reference databases that are out there that are allowing us to say what's in these samples are still growing. So it's a new field. It's very exciting, but and so we there's a lot we can tell, but we are also needing to build up the data and to better understand everything that's out there. So it's kind of cool to discover new things, even in cat poop. Another thing that I got really interested in from these citizen science projects was diet. I hadn't really, at that point, I hadn't tried a raw diet for my first dog. I did try a raw diet, but she seemed to really prefer her food cooked. So it didn't work for her. And then I was a disease ecologist. And so I was like worried about salmonella, and, certainly your vet's all like concerned about that. So I didn't explore it until Kitty Biome. And then there were all these people who fed their cats a raw diet. And I started to learn about, like, there's all this discussion about wet food, right? And that actually it's better for cats' kidneys to have food that has more moisture in it, because cats don't tend to drink water. They naturally would have gotten most of their needs met from eating killing a mouse and eating it, or a bird. And so I got introduced into this whole world of people who are doing raw feeding or also fresh diets, and have become interested in how those diets might affect the microbiome. And we've actually done a number of studies that are more controlled as well. So I thought, there may well be an effect of these diets on the gut microbiome. And certainly people who feed them are very passionate. So they're certainly getting a high quality diet. And even though the veterinary community has been, I think, very reluctant because of sort of food safety concerns to embrace these diets, there was a paper published a couple of years ago showing where they found that actually some of the people feeding these diets are some of the most conscientious, devoted pet parents out there. And so it's not like you're a bad pet parent for feeding a raw diet. It's just that the vets, we're being very cautious. And the veterinary community in general is, I think, very slow to adopt things. I mean, that's sort of, they're trained to follow sort of medical standards, and like, it takes a lot of time to change that community and the practice of medicine. So what we are finding when we look at the composition of bacteria in the gut with diet is that there are actually really big effects of diet on the microbiome. And in the case of fresh or raw diets, we can change the microbiome, and then we can change it back to the state before, depending on the diet that was fed. And I'm actually going to skip to, I'll come back. I'll come back to that in a minute. I have a couple slides later that I wanted to share just on how we are finding that the microbiome really is responsive to macronutrients in diet. So the amount of protein and carbohydrate and fat and fiber in the food really affects the relative amount of different kinds of bacteria that are found there. And I have a slide a few that reviews some of the ways in which these groups respond in sort of a predictable fashion. The other thing that I learned from talking to people about their pets was that there are a lot of pets with chronic ailments that show up as really altered microbiomes. And one thing that we're finding we're actually working on a couple papers that will be coming out this year, is that pets that are either missing key beneficial microbes or that have like elevated levels of E. coli or Escherichia tend to have had prior antibiotic exposure, which is sort of a common practice in veterinary medicine. And it may be given a bit too often, especially when it's given prophylactically. And there can be lasting effects on the composition of bacteria that not all of these organisms are able to recover afterwards. And then what we're finding is that these pets can end up with long-term conditions like chronic diarrhea. I think then the other thing just about supplements is that probiotics have become very popular, and they're certainly a very useful tool. But in terms of looking at the composition of gut bacteria, sometimes if they're on a powerful probiotic, we can't see the signal from the native bacteria that should be there. So we are concerned that there could be competition happening, but it's sort of an active area of research. So I wanted to just touch on really briefly pet obesity, because it's just a really critical topic as well. And this was back from October, but there's been a ton of really interesting work on how people and animals who differ in terms of being lean or obese, or even also malnourished or undernourished, have different compositions of gut bacteria. And they've seen that for people as well as mice, and really sort of predictable differences in that. And I became interested in looking at this in pets as well. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the idea of a germ-free mouse, but there's basically researchers who will raise little baby mice for experiments without their microbiome, as a way of trying to understand, well, what role does the microbiome play in mouse health? And it's a model system, and they have to go to a tremendous effort to keep all the microbes out. But basically what they found is that then they can take a germ-free young mouse and inoculate it with the microbiome of, in this case, they can do a normal weight fecal transplant from a mouse that has normal weight, or they can do fecal transplant from a mouse that is obese. They also actually did the ones that are underweight too. And all of these affect the phenotype of the adult mouse. So they actually have also found this with people. I don't know if you guys heard, there was sort of a lot of press coverage over a woman who had a fecal transplant done, I don't know, 5 years ago or so, because she had a chronic C. diff infection, Clostridioides difficile, which is, in some cases, it's an antibiotic resistant strain of C. diff, which is a normal member of the gut microbiome, but it's usually in very, very low abundances in people. But they identified about 20 years ago that there was an antibiotic resistant form. And I think the sort of combination of a lot of use of antibiotics, depleting microbiome composition, also maybe people spending a lot of time inside using antimicrobials all the time, and then getting hospitalized for something, and then having antibiotics, getting this antibiotic resistant strain introduced, they can end up with a life-threatening infection that can be resolved with a fecal transplant. So it sounds like a weird thing, but it's kind of it's become a thing in human medicine as well as in research on the microbiome. So I think, as I mentioned, so antibiotic exposure actually can influence not just some of these chronic GI conditions, but also affect propensity for things like obesity. All of which is suggesting that the microbiome is playing really important roles in managing things like this. They also find that it's important for kidney function and like glucose metabolism. So it's kind of this big field where the more we look, the more kinds of interactions we're finding between gut microbiota and health. In the case of dogs, since we're talking about dog science, basically, there's a lot of work done with beagles and colonies, and this study they found that beagles who were more likely to gain weight differed in the microbiome composition that they had. And there's several studies like this. I didn't want to highlight them all, and dogs who lose weight they also show differences in the composition of their microbiome, and one group that seems to really play an important role is Megamonas. I don't know if anyone's heard of Megamonas, but it seems to play a role in metabolism, and it's kind of interesting because basically, like, we think a lot about calories and how many calories you eat, but different microbes can extract different amounts of energy from the same number of calories. So it's not a static thing. And Megamonas has also been found to be important for weight loss in cats and humans. And then this is a more recent study looking at basically dogs who were overweight and the change in their microbiome after they were put onto a high fiber, high protein diet. And in this case, you see an increase in the diversity of bacteria, a decrease in imbalance. So they call dysbiosis is just a fancy term for imbalances in the composition of in this case, bacteria. So the community became more balanced, and you had less of these flare-ups of Escherichia, which is a common problem for many dogs. Another thing that microbiome researchers like to do is look at this ratio between firmicutes and Bacteroidetes. Firmicutes tend to have members that are more efficient at extracting calories from food, and so they have been associated with propensity to put on weight, and Bacteroidetes are less efficient. And so this ratio became something that scientists like to look at a lot, FB ratio. And that ratio did decrease as predicted from the human and mouse research in this study on dogs. And that was really because the Bacteroidetes group increased, and also Fusobacteria increased, which is a group that's really responsive to protein in the diet. So it's a nice study because it really confirms some of the observations that were made in other animals. So when we look at our data and we look at whether or not cats or dogs who are overweight or obese differ in microbiome composition, we're actually finding many differences. I don't want you to worry about the names of these groups here, but this we've done a lot of work now over the past 5 or 6 years, and in terms of understanding what healthy is, and that's allowed us to better understand how the microbiome can be altered when dogs or cats aren't healthy. Another really big area of focus in microbiome research has been on nutrition. And there's a review paper that came out last year showing how, basically reviewing a lot of the literature on how the composition of the microbiome in cats and dogs is affected by nutrition and also varies in health and disease. And I think it's definitely a paper that's worth taking a look at. This is a slide that I was sort of referring to earlier, where we have sort of combed through the literature to look at how do microbes that are common in dogs change when you add more fiber to the food or more protein, or decrease or increase the amount of carbohydrates. And so basically we have an understanding of, like, there's certain groups that are foundational for health that we like to see, but we don't want them necessarily to be overrepresented. And then we don't want them to be too rare. We've sort of done a lot of work on trying to understand what should the microbiome look like. You may have heard that we all have a unique microbiome. It's like a fingerprint, and that's true. But for the most prevalent groups, we are basically, when you think about the core microbiome, or the ones that are sort of shared the most between individuals, then we do like to see a certain amount of diversity there. There's other organisms that sort of are more of that unique fingerprint, but those tend to be really, really low abundance organisms, like less than 1% of the population. And they're really interesting, and they're sort of part of what I was really focused on when I was doing all that wildlife work, because you can actually understand the evolution of animals from looking at the coevolution side of it, from looking at their microbiome, but mostly that's in these really rare things. But when we think about health and cats and dogs, and how antibiotic use and other medications and aspects of modern living might have caused harm to the function of their gut microbiome, we sort of look at these core healthy groups. And so sort of, I don't know how we're doing on time, but I think I'm running out of time, right? But I just wanted to quickly summarize, which is that I've started 2 citizen science projects for cats and dogs, Kitty Biome and Doggy Biome, as a researcher, and then 4 years ago started a company, Animal Biome, and you can still continue to participate in this innovation by sending samples to us. So it's still available if you're interested. And we also actually run a stool bank to provide fecal transplants for sick pets who may have lost these key microbes that aren't in probiotics today. I'm happy to fill you in on some of those things that we're doing to sort of create innovation in this area. But I also just want to talk to you about the microbiome, and that it plays really important roles in animal health. Anxiety is a huge issue, and I've had, my first dog had a lot of separation anxiety, and so I'm happy to answer any questions about some of that. So one of the areas where there's the most research on the microbiome, I think, really has been in the sort of differences between like lean and obese animals, and how maybe it affects weight loss or gain. And then there's been a lot of research on diet and nutrition, which I think is basically nutrition science combined with microbiome science is a really exciting area. It's providing some real mechanisms for us to better understand nutrition. And I think in the past, there has been so many arguments over what's the right diet, because it wasn't enough of a science, but I think now it's really going to mature nicely. And I think with that, I want to thank you and take any questions. And I'd say, please feel free to email me with any questions. The easiest way is the team@animalbiome.com account, because then my team will keep me accountable if I don't get back to you. And then, of course, we're also active on social media. And love to talk to any of you.
Thank you so much, Holly. So we do actually have a ton of questions, so I'm just going to take them in the order received, and also just I'll make sure that I'll pick the ones that cover most people. So we have a question here from Beth, and like, it's not a question, but she just said she heard you speak at the last RNDS. That must be a conference that I don't know the name of. So I'll move on to Terry's question. She has a lab. I guess Kai is a Rhodian Black Lab mix, 85 pounds, who experiences what she thinks is GERD. And she's interested in knowing your opinion about controlling with diet, and if there is a correlation with the microbiome here, what your thoughts might be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably would be good to have a deeper conversation to get a little more information about what's going on with Kai. But certainly, there are a lot of dogs that are having sort of gastric reflux issues, and it is associated with altered microbiomes. I think it's more of an upper, small intestinal issue. It's sometimes, or can also be stomach. We have a staff veterinarian who we can consult with, actually, to try and better understand this. But I think there are ways in which diet can try to, I think more small meals. I think there are things that veterinarians will recommend.
Thank you. So we have a question from Dylan. She is actually a user. She uses Animal Biome for her 13-year-old Shih Tzu, who has suffered chronic skin allergies since he was a pup. He started on the animal biome pills in August and has demonstrated a considerable increase in vocalization. She says that, this may be a coincidental correlation, but would love to hear if you have any anecdotal findings or empirical findings about behavior changes related to fecal transplant. She has read some studies about this related to human fecal transplants previously.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a really fascinating area. I would say we don't have any good studies yet, but I think it would be, people are so interested in it, and we get a lot of anecdotal reports. I think with the cats, it's really clear that when they recover from like the chronic GI thing, they like, when they have like stomach problems, they crouch and they hide, and there's really clear behavioral shift for them. We are trying to look at how we can design questions to really better get information from people about how their dog's behaviors change in response. I mean, I'd love to know how the pup is doing now. Like,
Dylan, if you want to drop that in the chat.
Sure, I'll just answer you. He hasn't had any marked improvement in the skin conditions. He went through the first round, and the second I did buy the raw fed because he's on a raw fed diet, but I did purchase the raw when that became available. And I did buy a second test that I'll perform, but it's almost, the timing is very much correlated. Had the foresight to start journaling when I started him on it. So I've been taking daily record of how he's been doing, mostly in anticipation of him maybe having diarrhea or having stomach issues, but he had no issues on that front. He took it very well.
But the skin issues are continuing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know that sometimes it does really help with skin, but these are complicated problems.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk with you more later.
I'll reach you offline. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. Lori has a question. You have a poop question. It's what causes mucus and sausage casing type covering on doggy stool? Because her dog Hamilton has had this for several years. If you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it relates right to the intestinal tract sort of trying to rid itself of something that it's concerned with, but it can happen when there's chronic inflammation. And we do have some charts that we can share and sort of try to get a little more information about what might be happening, just so that we can tell from the poop color and consistency. I'm happy to follow up about that.
Great. So we do have some folks who are interested in learning about the efficacy of probiotics and how many strains are necessary for them to be useful.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question. I think that up until a few years ago, they were like, the more the better. And but now I think we're realizing that there were several studies that came out in the past few years suggesting that actually, like, if you give, there's a study 2 years ago where they found that if they gave probiotics after antibiotic exposure, that it actually delayed recovery of the native microbes. And then there have been some studies suggesting that actually, like, probiotics might harm outcomes for chemotherapy patients. This is in humans. And so I think people are now realizing, like, maybe probiotics need to be given more, more in a more directed fashion, like for a specific need, and not just given all the time or given prophylactically. So I think that we're going to be changing the answer to that from just like the most diverse and the most concentrated to maybe like more targeted, like this one is what you need for this problem.
Can I ask a question on that really quick, a follow-up?
Yeah, Andrea.
Say then, like, giving a probiotic in like a natural way, like a low-fat Greek yogurt, is more effective than using a powder or a pill form?
Yeah, I mean, that's really my inclination, is that like these fermented foods seem like a more natural way to go. And I think probably more beneficial and less likely to, I think that like, as we've gone down this path of like mega spore concentrations or whatever, that we're running into the wrong, like it's becoming too concentrated and maybe it's necessary for certain therapeutic situations, but like there hasn't been enough research to really support that. And I think that then you start to run into the potential for outcompeting the native microbes. Whereas I think if you get microbes in food, then it's not going to be a problem. It's I think the better way to get it.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. So we'll take one last question. I know people are very curious, but I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So this is an interesting question. So I'm curious too, Tiffany. Tiffany wants to know, I've heard that we end up having similar microbiomes to the people we spend the most time with. Do my dog and I influence each other's microbiome just by being around each other?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So there's a group at UC San Diego who started a project, and they looked at dogs and people's microbiomes living in houses together, and they actually thought that they would find like people share more microbes with their kids, and they actually I think just included dogs because one of the researchers likes dogs, and it was sort of a control group. But then they actually discovered that couples who lived together with a dog were sharing more microbes than couples who lived together without the dog. I think it's because we're very physical with our dogs. We pet them. We can really see a signal from the dog microbes moving into us and vice versa. And then there's the sort of whole hygiene hypothesis. So like it's good for us to be around animals. It's good for us to be around soil and spend time outside. And so that actually enriches the microbiome, sort of the hygiene hypothesis. And then there was a really cool study, actually, just one last study, which showed that house dust that has dog hair in it actually was beneficial for asthma when they did a model study in mice.
That is so interesting. Sure, this is what all dog people want to know, especially those who are trying to get more dogs, like myself, trying to convince the husband to let me get another dog. Holly, thank you so much. We're a little bit out of time, so I think we do have to end here. But is it fine if we send out that team@animalbiome.com email to everyone? So
absolutely.
Thank you. I will do that. So you guys will have a way to get in touch and learn more about these studies. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous coming in. I think this is such an interesting and new topic. I think it's just really fascinating to hear firsthand about all the cool research that's happening. So before we end, guys, tomorrow is the last day of Dog Science Week. Thank you so much for participating. Someone says 45 minutes is too short. Maybe next year we'll try to make these longer. But thank you for the feedback. I love it. It's nice to leave people wanting for a little bit more though, because then you guys will come back next time. Yeah, so today is day 4. I think I'll send out what we raised for social teas tomorrow morning in our recap email. But we do have one more day. Tomorrow we have Petminded's resident dog scientist. She will be talking about cognition and behavior, and we will be playing a fun cognition game together. So some of you have already been to our cognition meetups. They're really easy and fun. It's straightforward. We'll tell you in the morning a few household materials and dog treats, and of course your dog to have handy. And then we'll just play a quick game that will reveal to you how your dog thinks. And maybe that will be information you can file away for training or for some other purpose that you can try out over the weekend. I also mentioned yesterday that it is Friday and it's been it feels like January has already been really long. So feel free to bring like a glass of wine or tea or anything that helps you unwind. It's meant to be messy and casual. And just fun, because we want science to be fun for everyone. And then last but not least, I know I promised a code, so I'm just going to really quickly pull that up and before we take off. So just give me 1 second. So really quick, If you want to sign up for the program as a thank you for attending Dog Science Week, you can use the discount code Thursday35. If you have any questions, obviously feel free to drop us a note or an email, and we would be happy to take them. So I hope everyone got that. I'm going to stop sharing. Holly, thank you again so much. This is so interesting. And I hope everyone learned something cool from the session today. Again, I don't know if you read the chat. There's a lot of thank yous coming in. And hopefully we can have you come back. Tatiana, someone says the link is not working. Jan, if you give us your email, we'll make sure to send it over to you. Sorry about that. That's
Maybe
probably
it's a
my
period.
bad. Oh, yeah, maybe that's what it is. But yes, okay, there, there we go. Phew. Yeah, so I forgot what I was going to say, but Holly, thank you for coming and sharing. And we'd probably love to have you back another time to talk more and just maybe be able to have a more informal discussion around the microbiome. Really
I would love
appreciate
to.
it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And thanks for coming, everyone else. Hope to see many of you tomorrow. I'll be here with a glass of wine, so don't make me drink alone. Just kidding. Have a good night. Bye.